which is to declare a climate emergency. Can I please ask Councillor Denyer to move the motion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Climate change, these days more accurately described as climate breakdown or climate chaos, is not an abstract or distant threat. It means abrupt and irreversible changes that will wreck lives and livelihoods. It is an emergency. When a child steps out in front of a car, you don't carry out a feasibility study or convene a working group. You act immediately to prevent a tragedy. The same is now true of climate change. It may not seem as fast-moving as a speeding car, but the thing is, it's a juggernaut that will take years to change course. And we've already allowed it to slowly but surely bear down upon our children for decades without doing very much at all. So now we need to pull the brakes on, hard. This motion calls for two main things: to declare a climate emergency and to pledge to make the City of Bristol carbon neutral by 2030. The principle behind this motion is that the first step in solving any crisis is acknowledging the scale of the problem. The next step is committing to address it, and once we have made that commitment, then we have to decide how. That's why this motion requires a report to full council within 6 months, detailing the actions that the Mayor or Council will take to address this emergency. I have no doubt that it is possible, and Councillor Clark and myself will expand on that more later. All that's needed, really, is political will. In order to achieve this bold but essential target, my motion has some secondary demands: to call on Westminster to provide the powers and resources to make the 2030 target possible, to work with other governments, locally, nationally and internationally, to devise and implement best practice methods, and to continue to work, I know we already are, with partners across the city and region to deliver this new goal through all of the relevant strategies and plans that we hold. An example of that last point is Bristol Airport. The airport is proposing to grow by 50% in the next few years and more than double in size in the longer term. If we are to prevent catastrophic climate change, this and other airport expansions proposed across the country cannot be allowed to happen. We also have the opportunity through the West of England Combined Authority to push for alternatives for radical green transport and technology through the region that has the potential to create more jobs as well as a reduction in our carbon emissions. I became a Green politician after grasping the scale of the climate emergency and recognising that environmental and social issues are two sides of the same coin. So while I think that averting a climate catastrophe must be our city's very highest priority, please understand that this is not at the expense of addressing inequality and poverty in our city. Quite the opposite. As we all well know, I hope, those most affected by climate change, and by things like air quality too, are the poorest in society, globally and locally. These problems are intertwined, and so are their solutions. So, dear fellow councillors, I implore you, please support this motion. Thank you.
Okay. And can I ask Councillor Clark to second the motion, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very proud to second this motion. This is easily the most important speech I've ever made, and I feel quite emotional about it. What we're heading for, as Carla's told us eloquently, is a full-scale climate emergency. We could see breakdown in the way we manage and order our society, the way we grow our food, and the way we live with the natural world. Bristol is by instinct a green place. That's green with a small g, of course. We seem to be on track with our carbon targets, and projects like LEAP look really promising. Marvin and previous administrations really deserve lots of credit for this. What has changed, as you probably all know, is that the recent report, IPCC report, has shown the true scale of our task and has given us a timescale of only 12 years to try and do something about it. We have to be much more ambitious than we have been. hence this motion. The IPCC report, all 800 pages of it, show the difference that can be caused by extra global warming of only half a degree, from 1.5 to 2 degrees. And the impacts are enormous. In fact, the report lists nearly 800 pages of them. If we allow the extra half a degree rise to happen, hundreds of millions more people, especially in poorer countries, will be thrown into climate-related starvation and chaos, and the insect and plant world would be devastated. However, all is not gloom. The report shows us clear strategies to limit the rise to 1.5 degrees and concludes that the major thing, as Carla alluded to, that could stop this is lack of political will. Lots of other urban areas have taken up this challenge, and from Warsaw to Wuhan, incredibly ambitious plans have been announced. Nearer home, Andy Burnham, who's had a few mentions this evening, has announced plans for Manchester to reach their neutrality by 2040, 10 years earlier than previously planned. He talks clearly about the huge economic opportunities presented by a thriving green economy. He's right. There are enormous investment and job opportunities in being right at the leading edge of this issue. For example, I'm pretty sure that our current green credentials are at least a part of the reasons why Channel 4 chose us as one of their new homes. If we were even more ambitious, I'm sure we could secure a sustainable and prosperous economic future for Bristol. The recent LGA review stated that the actions of this council were a catalyst for change. Well, please, please, let's see that ambition in action tonight. Marvin, we call on you to be the hero of this story and to leave a real legacy for generations to come. Declare a climate emergency, make us carbon neutral by 2030, and please report back on what you're doing so we can really help. Thank you.
So we'll go over to our other speakers now, starting with Councillor Jarmer, please.
Bristol was one of the first local authorities to own a wind turbine, amongst the earliest to set up a council-owned energy company, providing 100% green tariffs, and the only UK city to spend a year as European Green Capital. And now, with the majority for the first time since 2003, we are building on Labour's legacy in government, including implementing the Kyoto Protocol through the climate change. Unfortunately, here we have a Green Party in all but name, one which votes with Tory councillors against some of the £14 million of our capital investment in clean energy while supporting developments which would have worsened already illegal air quality for some of the poorest Bristolians. It's this all Labour administration that is at the forefront of changing and tackling climate change. Thank you.
And now, Councillor Weston, please.
I'm not quite sure whether you're supporting it or not, I must say, after that. Thank you. Okay, I'm taking a deep breath. I feel I'm about to become a semi-pantomime villain. I'm actually going to vote in favour of the motion, but that's not unequivocal support. I agree with where the thrust of it is going. And I think climate change is a serious problem and needs tackling. And actually, I think good work is happening around the world and in this country. You may think that it needs to be faster, but we do have more, for example, offshore wind than any other country. The cost of solar power has dropped by 35% since 2010. There is good things happening. Coal power stations are closing. There's that. But I then come to the leak prospectus. Now, that does sound exciting. I'm afraid I got my brief on Thursday. You may have had your brief already. So let us just wait. We want to see the devil in that detail, but it might be very good. But there are two things that I do have concern about on this, and I want to be honest about that. And one of those is, are cities best placed to tackle climate change? And if I'm honest, I'm not sure they are. I'm actually not sure countries on their own are best placed to tackle climate change. I mean, the example that always comes to me is the Lynmouth aluminium smelter, where we passed environmental legislation here, which was good legislation. I approved of it. But the result was that Lynmouth closed, and we now import our aluminium from other countries with less stringent environmental records. It made us feel good. We had virtuous CO2 drop and everything else, but actually the amount of global CO2 went up. And it was one of those laws of unintended consequences. You were right to mention Kyoto. And actually, when we think about the tackling of the ozone layer and the problems with CFCs, things like that, that was a genuine global response. And we should applaud that, and we should be trying to emulate it. But cities acting on their own, I'm not sure. We can certainly provide a lead. And I think we can be a test bed. And maybe that's where LEAP Prospectus comes in. We can be that test bed of technologies and push it. But actually, if we really want to reduce CO2, we really want to tackle climate change, we're not best placed. I disagree on that. Well, I think we also need to look at 2030. Is it achievable? Genuinely. It's certainly aspirational. It's something that we should be aspiring to. But Andy Burnham was mentioned. I'm not convinced 2030 actually is possible. Certainly not acting on our own. Because I think what you might find is we can try and become carbon neutral, and the industries, for example, at Avonmouth, will they simply relocate further up Sevenside into South Gloucestershire? I'm not sure we're able to do it on our own. It needs to be a far more holistic approach. And it's one of those things that we have to balance both an economic and a climate response, because we need to be able to afford the mitigations that we need. Because climate change, what we're talking about here is actually trying to limit climate change. And that is going to lead to increased sea levels. It is going to mean we have to spend more on flood defences. We have to pay for that.
We're out of time.
So I will finish very, very quickly, I promise, my Lord Mayor. So I rise in support, and I will vote in favour. But I'm not convinced that some of the language actually is achievable. And I think we need to be cognizant of that, rather than set ourselves goals that actually we know we can't reach. But it's a good aspiration, and I will support it today. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you. So back over to Councillor Negus, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Well, in answer to you, Mark, and I have been very encouraged by many of the things that have happened in the world in the last 10 years. I've been an environmental activist most of my life, and I feel very, very strongly about this. I can tell you that the Liberal Democrats, when we brought in the Green Capital, had Europe and actually the world listening to what we were doing and saying. And that's the sort of ethos we need to engender again. You only get one go at life, Mark. If you're in a place, that's the place you start from. If it needs to be done now, we're the ones to do it, because we're the ones that are here now. The worrying thing, I think, about some of the positive things that have been happening on the supply side is that's given us a very false sense of security. No one would have believed the massive progress that's been made in generating energy, particularly in all manner of means, and some of the better ones are not even being exploited yet properly. I'm talking of wave energy and tidal energy particularly, which I'm a massive fan of. But that gives us some comfort. And I'm afraid there's not a lot of comfort out there if you look in the long term. The thing that's really changed recently is that and the word was mentioned, it's irreversible. There was always the opportunity that when we did actually get to grips with this and being able to solve it, and carbon capture and all the other big stuff that are going to be needed, that we'd actually always find a way of saying, we're going to do this, it's just going to take longer. What hasn't been said by IPPC, well, it has, but not really with enough emphasis, and certainly not been mentioned around here, is some of the things we have to really concern about. That's the lag that we've got. When we switch off all this energy, the lag and the time it will take for that to still have an impact is profound. We have heard since the IPPC that we're going to have that we've already got much increased oceanic temperatures than we believe. This will cause increased methane and other problems coming from the oceans. And if that attacks the permafrost in the tundra, in the northern countries, and that starts to leak methane as well, we are stuffed guys. This is absolutely it. So we don't get a chance of saying, we don't get the apology, the excuse of saying, yeah, okay, we're doing it at a fair speed, we've got other things to think about and all the rest, but that just means we're going to put off the good day when we can solve this. It actually doesn't. If we don't crack this seriously now, and I don't think, I do agree with Mark, I don't think 2030 is actually achievable. But I tell you what, if we don't start now aiming for a date that is the fastest date we can possibly do this, nothing is going to be achievable. And if we don't get this right, we are in, I mean, it is just the most serious. You can't actually conceive, not even a world war, as being as serious as not having a planet to live in for people and all the other species and the wildlife, the flora and fauna that make up this fabulous planet, which interacts so minutely to keep us all alive and frankly functioning. If we get some of this, one little bit of this wrong, then it will all escalate and cause, I'm afraid to say this, a catastrophe. So we need leadership, we need a lifestyle change, we need a legislation, and that's the one that worries me the most. Up to now, I've been very encouraged by the prospect of nudging progress. Thank you.
End there, please.
Nudging progress on this, but now we're going to have to get really serious and do things by the book. In terms of what comes out of this report, I'm just finishing in terms of what comes out of this report. We have to have muscle, and we have to, all the things that this city does must be focused on this problem.
Right.
Everything's
Thank
turned
you very
around.
much.
That's the answer.
So now I believe the Mayor would like to respond.
Thank you very much. So I'll just try and whip through a few key points, reflections. First of all, I think some stuff you said, Mark, I resonate with, right? But I'm just going to say that I do think that actually cities can act. But what I would say is it's not about cities acting alone, it's cities acting collectively. So the heart of Ben Barber's work around this global parliament of mayors that we brought to Bristol was that actually national governments are failing. Climate change, migration, economic inclusion, the key principles of building a healthy society in the world, national governments are failing. And actually the next iteration of global governance will include international networks of cities working together to shape national and international policy. That's what we did in this very chamber, with the 70 to 80 mayors and the 10 to 15 leaders of global networks, including C40, who were here as well. It's about how do we begin to shape the context in which we have to operate. So the reservations, there's a limited, but if we work collectively across international boundaries, we can do. And actually, at the end of that core cities, at the end of that global parliament of mayors, we hosted in Bristol the first ever formal meeting of the core cities and all the metro mayors. 3 priorities we agreed we'd take on as a national network of non-Westminster politicians. One was around air quality and climate, the second was education and skills, and the third was about a comprehensive spending review that actually was serious about the devolution of the resources and powers we need to take charge of our real futures. So actually, as a network of cities, it's happening in this chamber, we have stepped up on that, and I think we'll see how that plays itself out. Secondly, I tried to make these short, Lord Mayor. There is a huge opportunity when we think about how we do this as a single city. You know, making a declaration in this organisation, which is why I'm sometimes reserved about that, it's just about like wearing a T-shirt with the slogan and the badge. That doesn't do it. You know, this organisation working alone cannot deliver. There's the health service, there's the criminal justice system, there's our universities. These are essentially sovereign organisations in the city. Now, what we have tried to do, and participation has been minimal, but you'd be welcome to do so, is in our efforts to pull together a single city plan, it is about rallying the whole city to a smaller number of shared priorities. One of those narratives that we want to be very clear about, specific targets about for Bristol, is actually about sustainable development. So actually talking about a target for 2030 is fine. we can put that into the plan. I've asked Bristol Green Capital Partnership if we can look at that today and invited some people to participate in that. So if we want to be there in 2030, let's be real about what we need to deliver and where we need to be in 29, 28, 26, 24, but also not just in terms of sustainability. We have to be serious about the price it costs to get there. Nothing's free. It costs to get there. What are the implications for housing, for transport, for education and skills, for inclusive development, for wealth and health and well-being, or the implications not always cost? We have to look at how it interacts, across the piece. And actually what I would say is, as a city, we have done some, it's not just about the badge, it's about doing serious things like the LEAP program, including our heat networks, retrofitting building, the largest order of biogas buses in the country. So I just want to say about how it can be received as well, and this is about us being real in this chamber now. Earlier on, we were picked up because we put out an ambitious target on recycling. Today, that was used as a catch you out moment. If we're going to have the confidence to put ambitious targets on the table, what we have to be confident about is that everyone in this chamber says, okay, here's an ambitious target. Now we're going to turn up and help you fill out what you need to do to get there, because no person, no party has all the truth. What we can't do is then use that as a, well, come back in 6 months and tell us what you came up with. You have to sit around the table and come up with some of those solutions. Help us map out the journey to get there. Then actually we have a relationship of integrity. If we think it's just going to be an opportunity to twist your arm back, then there's going to be reluctance. Now, I'm happy to go along with this. I share in a sense of emergency. One of my friends was the lead climate change negotiator for Africa. He talks about the death sentence of the continent. We recognise that. We recognise the implications for global migration crisis as well, and the interplay between the two. But my challenge to the chamber is, don't then weaponise this. Don't use it as a platform simply to signal your sense of moral superiority. Let's use it as an opportunity to rally the city around a specific number of shared priorities. Can I just say one other thing? There's an easy phrase that's floated out here, that all it takes is political will. It takes more than political will. I have a political will to end racism. It doesn't make it disappear. It's much more complicated than that. And if all we say is the only thing lacking is political will, then I think we do politics a disservice, and we undermine the public debate. It takes political will, yes, but then we have to talk about resources and strategies and plans and finding that common ground, and how we extend the leadership that happens within this organisation and the influence to other institutions, how that links up with other cities around the world and influences our national government. If all it took was political will, we'd sit here with a blank piece of paper, write down our wishes, and they would be delivered. So I just think we just need to be careful in the way we talk about it, because again, what I hear there is a setup that says the reason it's not happening because there's no political will. Again, that would be unfortunate if that was what was happening. It would be weaponizing a very, very important issue. There's political will, but we need the plan, and we're all on board for 2030. But don't weaponize it, help us deliver it.
Thank you. So I'm now going to go back to Councillor Denyer to respond.
Thank you. Thank you for those points, most of them very valuable. Some of them less so, though. I think I need to answer the horrendously misleading points from Councillor Hibak-Jama. As she well knows, the Green councillors did not vote against all of those sustainability measures. We voted against the budget as a whole because of the horrendous swinging cuts that were encompassed in it. We asked for the budget to be broken down into sections so that we could vote for the bits that we supported and not the bits that we didn't, and that wasn't allowed. Moving back to the point. This motion deliberately didn't go into the fine detail of how to implement neutrality by 2030 because, as I was saying, the principle of the motion is first acknowledging the scale of the emergency and committing to address it. Once the motion has passed, and I'm really happy to hear that it's going to, then it will become a high priority of the Council, and then the Council administration and officers can commit. I appreciate we've got limited resource in the Council, but can still commit much more resource to drawing up detailed implementation plans than I would be able to do alone as a lone backbench councillor with minimal officer support. That said, I'm very happy to be involved in the city plan or whatever the correct mechanism is for me to get involved in working out those solutions with you. I'd also like to quickly pick up on Councillor Mark Weston's point that climate change is best tackled at a larger scale than cities or even countries. Actually, Mark, we don't disagree on that. We completely agree. You've just slightly misunderstood my point. My point wasn't that it's best tackled at a city level. It's that it's being inadequately dealt with at national and international levels. And so we might as well use whatever powers we can scrape together at a local level to do everything we can do while simultaneously lobbying for action at every other level of government. And that is, in fact, a couple of the points in the motion. Answering also, Mark, you're not sure if it's a realistic point. Yes, the 2030 target will be difficult, but with greater than 1.5 degrees C of global warming, which is what we're sort of rapidly heading towards, surviving in many parts of the world will be difficult. There are different realities butting up against each other here, economic and political realities and physical realities. But economic and political realities can change according to political will and prevailing opinion. Physical realities are not so negotiable, so I think it's really clear which reality needs to be respected here. It's also clear from the mass civil disobedience events taking place in Bristol, London and across the country in the last few weeks that people are really ready and waiting for Bristol to declare this climate emergency. Those taking part in the non-violent direct actions are not the usual suspects, though credit to them too. They include academics, professionals, journalists, lawmakers, grandparents, children, and those of all faiths and none. They are prepared to engage in civil disobedience now to force urgent climate action because they look at their national and local governments and don't see anything being done nearly fast enough. So please, let's prove them wrong and heed their call. Enough of words, it's time to act.
So, let's now move to the vote. Are you ready? Please vote now. Is carried. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much, councillors and members of the public, for your engagement, and I do hope